morning, lovelies! Today's What's the Difference video is geared a little more toward writing advice than the usual genre definition that we tend to do on this playlist, because today we are asking and answering the question, what is the difference between plot and story, which is really only something that writers care about. There is overlap between the two, which is why a lot of people tend to use those words interchangeably, but they are still different and distinct. Writers need to know the difference between plot and story so that they can more easily troubleshoot problems that pop up in one or the other, and getting them mixed up or confused just makes that so much harder. So let's get started. What is a plot? Plot is the easy one. It is the nuts and bolts of the story. Characters start at point A, they go to point B, they experience a character death at point C, etc. It is the literal sequence of events that the characters go through over the course of the story. It's also probably going to be the most formulaic part of your book. I mean, it's almost always going to include an inciting incident, aka a catalyst, the point of no return, aka crossing the threshold, a bad fall or lowest point, that's like the darkest hour type of thing, a climax, and a resolution. I did a video on the hero's journey which breaks these down further, and I will link that up in the cards. There are several other ways to organize your plot, but that's the most classic. Because plot is the literal sequence of events, your outline, if you do those things, is going to be focused on your plot rather than your story. Concerning your plot, there's almost always at least one protagonist that's going to drive some of the events in the story. A plot that happens entirely to the protagonist makes them feel weak and very passive. They're just reacting to events rather than instigating anything. But plots that happen at least partially because of the protagonist tend to be a bit more interesting, such as Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. I mean, sure, the inciting incident at least happens to him, like, you know, running into R2-D2 and then his aunt and uncle getting toastified, but everything after that is because Luke is deciding to do the thing. He is deciding to go after Princess Leia. He is deciding to blow up the Death Star, etc. But we don't just like Star Wars because we like watching Luke blow stuff up, although that is a part of it. There's a heart and soul to the movie that really solidified it as such a fan favorite, and it secured its place in the mainstream, and that is the story. So what is a story? This one is, honestly, it's harder to pin down both as a definition and as a writer. Basically, the story of a story is the experience that the characters go through, the emotions, the changes they go through. It's one of those things that, yeah, it's hard to define, but you also, you know it when you see it, and you definitely notice when it's missing. We're gonna get into that later. A reader may ask, why am I reading this book? Or why should I read this book? And story is the answer. The plot might catch their attention, but the story is what draws them in. In earlier videos, I've mentioned something called the B plot. Don't let the name fool you. That's basically story. This concept comes from Save the Cat Writes a Novel, which I highly, highly, highly recommend that every single writer have on their bookshelf, and more importantly, that they actually read and internalize. Save the Cat details two lines that run in every single effective story, the A plot and the B plot. The A plot is what catches your reader's attention. It is the concept, it's the flashing lights. The A plot in How to Train Your Dragon, for instance, is Hiccup learning how to train dragons rather than kill dragons, which accumulates in him killing a big dragon. Anyway, that's the A plot. But the B plot is how Hiccup transforms his society and is transformed himself through his relationships with Toothless, Astrid, and his father Stoic. That's the story. Outsider boy who does not really belong in Viking society learns to use his differences to his advantage and ends up starting a whole new chapter in their history using compassion and knowledge rather than the brute strength that they're used to. He becomes a hero in the process and forges an actual functioning relationship with his father. The story is going to accumulate theme, character reactions, and emotions in order to tie everything together. I'm not going to say that one is better than the other or one is more important than the other. You kind of need both. So let's talk about what happens when you have a book that is all story, no plot. This is rare, especially in Western literature, because we are taught in some of our earliest English lessons that plot is everything. We all went through the whole thing where we got that weird angled triangle and we had to plot out, okay, here's the inciting incident and the rising action and the climax. But missing the plot does happen, and the biggest example that I can think of in my experience is Fables. This is a graphic novel series about all the characters of fairy tales and fables being alive, being immortal, and living in New York City as refugees because their fantasy homeland has been taken over by this evil entity. The big bad wolf is a private investigator who lets the three little pigs crash in his apartment. Prince Charming is the sleazebag ex-husband of Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, and Cinderella. Speaking of which, Cinderella owns a shoe shop, but that's a front because she's actually a spy, and so is Aladdin. The character interactions are great, and I love how they've acclimated or not acclimated to modern New York American living. The first few books do have a plot that at least seem to go somewhere, but after that point, it kind of peters out. Like, the story still goes forward, but like there's no structure. There's nothing tying together all of these cool themes and characters, and once I lost the thread of the plot, I lost all interest. Because there was no plot, there was no thread for me to hold on to. That's the risk of focusing too much on story rather than plot. So let's talk about the inverse. All plot, no story. And this is far more common in Western media. Mindless action flicks. Yeah, they're exciting and a lot of stuff happens, but I mean, they're so superficial. If the last half hour of any movie, the climax can just be summarized as they fight, the good guys win, it doesn't have much of a story to it. And hey, sometimes that is exactly what the people are after. They just want to watch some cool, exciting stunts on their screen and not really get too invested, and that's just how they unwind, that's what they want, low stakes. Those films are hardly memorable. This was my issue with Altered Carbon. I have not seen the show, but I did read the book, and I was decidedly unimpressed. It is so plot heavy, but there's not much story. It felt like the themes of personhood and body versus soul that could have been explored in all 300 pages were just crammed into the last couple of chapters. And even at the end of the book, we still don't know jack shit about our main character, where he comes from, his backstory, why the girl he's trying so hard to save is actually important to him, all of his hopes and dreams, or whether he has any, or why not. The main character is basically a non-entity in Altered Carbon, and that makes it incredibly difficult to have a story. If you want to have a good story, you need to take a break from the plot every now and then. I know that sounds counterintuitive, it's running counter to everything that we have ever been taught in our English literature classes, but it's true. It's true even if you're designing media that's supposed to be for kids or something that's really fast-paced. And let me show you what I mean here. Let's go back to How to Train Your Dragon, which is both for kids and very fast-paced. This scene between Stoic and Hiccup is not, strictly speaking, necessary for the plot. Stoic has just got back from his failed dragon hunt to find Hiccup is the new town celebrity and absolutely crushing it in his dragon training classes. A complete 180 from how he started the film. And he sits down to have an actual conversation with Hiccup and is really listening to him for like the first time in this entire movie, and probably for the first time in years. But Hiccup's success is coming from the fact that he's been working secretly with the dragon Toothless, learning all about these dragons by interacting with and observing them in a very un-Viking-like way. And he has just the scene right before this one is him realizing that literally everything that Vikings know about dragons is wrong, what his father is doing is wrong. They have this awkward, stilted moment that does nothing for the plot, but everything for the story. It shows that things are even worse between these two now than they were at the start of the movie, and they were not in a good place at the start of this movie. Hiccup has wanted his father's approval since forever, and now he has it and he wants nothing to do with it. That approval is all based on a lie that, when it comes to light, almost destroys this family. Someone obsessed with plot would have probably cut this scene because it does not, strictly speaking, move the plot forward. But someone obsessed with story over plot probably would have gotten rid of everything having to do with the dragon nest and the dragon queen because that's just a flashy way to force these two characters to actually sit down and talk to each other. But balancing both is what makes How to Train Your Dragon such a great film. Both plot and story need to be present. Sacrificing one or the other just makes a crappy book. One last thing I'll say about this, if you're still having trouble. If your book is the human anatomy, then the plot is the skeleton, while the story is the flesh and blood. The plot gives everything structure, but the actual meat is the story itself. And that's the difference between plot and story. If you liked this video, I have an entire playlist dedicated to writing advice and another playlist dedicated to What's the Difference, which I will link on the screen. Have fun, and I will see you next time. Bye, lovelies.